everybody. First of all, I would like to share my screen because my presentation is essentially nothing but a series of slides. And I'm also setting my reminder so as not to be carried away in terms of time. This 15-minute time frame is very tight. So because of that, what I'm going to do in my presentation is essentially I'll show you a number of, to me, absolutely fascinating data. You can think of this presentation as a very slow cartoon, just pictures of the pictures of the pictures. And the focus of the presentation is on basically one variable that I find particularly revealing and really interesting. And it is a relatively little discussed feature of the histories of socialism and capitalism over the last, let's say, 6-7 decades, and that is life expectancy at birth. By way of an introduction, I would just say that life expectancy is a constructed measure. It cannot be measured directly. But it is constructed from direct observations. It is constructed from age-specific mortality rates. If anybody cares to find out more about it, you can do so. What I like about it is that to me, it has a very particular, how should I say, illuminating power about the sum totality of social relations. And in my mind, a society that is able to give longer lifespan to its citizenry than other societies, then that society which is able to offer the longer lifespan is doing something right. And I think that question goes directly to the heart of the question of socialism versus capitalism. The one other thing I like about it is that life expectancy is just about as materialist a variable as you can imagine. I mean, after all, there is nothing more material, nothing more relevant to the histories of socialisms than life. The ability of large swaths of populations of people to actually be able to live. So having said that, what I'm going to show you is a number of slides. First, I'm going to only talk about the capitalist world. What I mean by that is that the first set of slides will ignore the socialist world. That will come in the second half. So these are only the capitalist countries, or to be in more formal language, these are the countries of the world which had never, it's interesting, my PowerPoint is having its own mind somehow. So these are the countries that had never had a transformation into socialism ever in their history. And this is a particular time snapshot for 1960. Now, I don't think there's going to be much discussion about the basic idea of this graph, which is that GDP per capita or some other measure of national economic performance will impact upon the likelihood that people will live longer. In other words, I'm expecting a positive covariance between the level of national income and life expectancy at birth. Lo and behold, that relationship holds. If you just ignore the lines for a moment and you only focus on the dots, it's fairly clear that the dots sort of vaguely go from sort of the bottom left or the top right corner of the graph. That blue line in the middle is what is called the regression line. That is the most likely value that represents the relationship between all these two variables for all the data points that you see here. And the green lines are the medians. So if we take the horizontal green line, exactly half of the cases fall below it and the other half fall above it. And the same is true for the vertical line. So half of the cases is to the left, half the cases is to the right. The reason I put it in there is for us to be able to orient ourselves. So there is a positive covariance between level of GDP per capita and life expectancy in 1960. Not a particularly strong one. By the way, if the level of national income completely determined life expectancy, then all the cases in this graph would fall on this line, right? So the fact that there are some that are here, some here, is that relationship is not perfect, but pretty strong. 1970, as you can see, the crossing point between the medians is going up and to the right, because over time, life expectancy for humankind has increased, and so has the numerical value of the GDPs per capita. And this is for 1980, 90, 2000, 2010, 2019. So far, I really don't have much of anything of particularly exciting to report. Now I would like to call your attention, however, for the next set of slides, because now what we're going to do is we're going to add the socialist countries for the same period, starting from 1960 onward, to the same graph. So everybody, be ready. Are you sitting? Okay. Hold your breath. Here we go. So what we have is already in 1960, we have a situation in which pretty much almost without exception, with this one exception here, all the red dots are above the capitalist regression line, meaning all the socialist countries of the world are doing better, some of them breathtakingly, very considerably better than the capitalist countries of the world. And I want to direct your kind attention to two. This dashed line is what I call the socialist global south. It's a bit of a play with the words, because at that time they called the global south third world, but I don't like that expression at all. The PRC at the bottom end of that line, and Cuba at the top. We're talking about 1960. This is the year after the Cuban Revolution. This is the year in which Fidel nationalized the means of production in Cuba. What is really interesting, I think, about this graph, however, are the two other lines. This continuous red line, which represents the socialist countries of East Central Europe, and the dotted line here, which represents Yugoslavia. Both of them already in 1960 are very considerably above the capitalist world. The poorest actually among the socialist countries of East Central Europe, that would be this one, I'm pretty sure that's Albania, that happens to be, I don't know, what would be this distance? Almost 20, have an almost 20-year longer life expectancy at birth than what would be expected on the basis of its GDP per capita. In other words, already what we see is a fairly strong relationship between socialism and life expectancy, in the sense that socialist countries clearly offer a longer life space for their citizenry. By the way, the same is true for Yugoslavia, which is represented by this dotted line. Unfortunately, for this year and for 1970, the Soviet Union did not publish republic level life expectancy information except for Russia, and that is here. So Russia, the Russian Federation, as part of the Soviet Union, was doing about as well in terms of life expectancy as if it had been a member state of Yugoslavia at that time. Okay, so moving on to 1970, I really want to sort of call your attention to the lines, the red lines, as well as Cuba and the PRC. So what we have, to me, the most interesting aspect of it all is that even by 1970, the socialist states have maintained their advantages in terms of life expectancy, particularly for the poorer ones among them, right? And as a result, both the socialist countries of East Central Europe, as well as Yugoslavia, have lines that represent them that are almost completely horizontal. What that means is that the poorest socialist country in East Central Europe, that, as I said, I'm pretty sure that's Albania, and the richest one, which in this case would be the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, right here, have almost exactly the same, not quite, but almost exactly the same life expectancy. And the same is even more true for Yugoslavia. In other words, what is happening is not just that the socialist character of these societies has actually increased the life expectancy of their citizenry on all levels of economic income, but that there is a transnational effect going on. Something about the integration among these societies seems to work in the direction of actually increasing the life expectancy of the poorer ones a little more, so that there is actually this magic word, international equality, that seems to be emerging in this particular context. Now, moving on to 1980, and this is the first time we have detailed data for the USSR. The USSR is this darkish, reddish line here. What we see is the People's Republic of China is again is sort of emerging as an exceptionally with a country with a high life expectancy. Cuba is maintaining its phenomenal lead in the socialist global south. The socialist countries of East Central Europe, as well as Yugoslavia, are completely flat. In other words, by 1980, they completely eliminated their differences in terms of life expectancy. And the USSR, at the same time, very counterintuitively to me, on the other hand, does not show any difference from the capitalist regression line. In other words, the USSR seems to have behaved as if it were, in terms of life expectancy, the differences among its republics seem to have as if they had been capitalist countries all along. Now, moving to 1990, this is the time of the collapse of state socialism in East Central Europe, Yugoslavia, and the USSR. That was this part of the graph. Again, you still have Cuba. Cuba is doing, by 1990, better in terms of life expectancy than any of the other East Central Europe or post-Yugoslavia, anybody else. The USSR is still very much parallel with the capitalist line, but below it. And the first time in history, we see that the wealthier socialist society or former socialist societies of East Central Europe are now falling below what you would expect if they had been capitalist. And the same is true for Yugoslavia. And this is very remarkable because this is in 1990, this 1 year after the collapse. In that region, already the richer countries already show a decline. This is 2000. Again, Cuba is maintaining its phenomenal lead. Cuba's level of life expectancy is one that matches that of the welfare states of Western Europe. The USSR seems to, the former USSR seems to, okay, this was my reminder that I need to wrap up, and I'm almost there. Is becoming flatter, but not quite. Moving farther away from the collapse, this is 20 years after the collapse. One thing I wanted to have to mention about the 1990 figure, this difference here is a socialist, post-state socialist East Central Europe being so far still, the poorer ones still so far above the capitalist expected value, and the same for Yugoslavia, is the subsidy, one of the subsidies that they brought and handed over to capital when they privatized. And finally, the latest data point, 2019, shows essentially the same trends happening with East Central Europe and former Yugoslavia maintaining pretty much their position, but getting closer and closer to the capitalist mean simply by virtue of the fact that the capitalist mean is emerging. And to conclude, it is clear that under capitalism, life expectancy at birth is positively influenced by levels of national income, no surprise to me. The socialist institutional transformations in East Central Europe, Yugoslavia, and Cuba give an almost instant boost to life expectancy, and they soon filtered out the effects of income differences on the quality of life. Even in the context of global capitalism, what we have learned here is that societies, in spite of the fact that the global economy is capitalist, individual societies or groups of them could increase life expectancy, in some of them spectacularly, assuming that they are able to have primarily public domestic ownership of the means of production, meaning they essentially eliminated or severely constrained the operation of private property and therefore reduced exploitation to very low levels. They have a local primacy of redistribution over reciprocity and exchange. And they have institutions and practices of alternative global supra-state integration. In the case of the, I'm thinking about the Comic-Con, but there are others as well, industrial integration systems and so on. I have 4 more points, okay? The USSR, on the other hand, very surprising to me, never eliminated the internal republic-to-republic differences in life expectancy, and as a whole has not managed significantly to surpass capitalist countries in life expectancy, in spite of the fact that it was part of those institutions and practices of alternative supra-state integration that gave that advantage to the poorer parts of East Central Europe. So the Soviet Union subsidized Eastern Europe even to the detriment of itself. It's a very interesting, very counterintuitive finding, at least for somebody in East Central Europe. Now, it is just to repeat what we've seen, the decline in life expectancy in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia did not begin with the collapse in 1989-91, but 5 to 15 years before that. There was a crisis that preceded that, and that already started pushing their life expectancy down. In 1989-91, the European socialist countries still had noticeable advantages in life expectancy, and those turned into a never properly acknowledged subsidy to private capital as they privatized themselves and regressed to capitalism. After 89, in East Central Europe, Yugoslavia, and the USSR, the most open and wealthiest societies lost their relative advantages fastest and fell below the capitalist regression line. And finally, Cuba and the People's Republic of China, who have very different patterns here, are 2 remarkable positive outliers in the socialist global south in terms of life expectancy. They therefore require separate analyses. And I very much want to urge colleagues to look at their specific history in those terms, because their institutional arrangements might turn out to be useful for the future of today's global south. And thank you so much for your attention.